Good afternoon. Excuse me while I organise my microphone. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's CI Tools webinar. My name's Josh Osborne and I'm the Product Manager for the CI Tools here at Central Innovation. And this is a weekly webinar where we go over stuff to do with the CI Tools. So we'll look at frequently asked questions. We will look at maybe things that have been asked recently on the support desk or that have been in recent updates to the tools that might be of interest. And we also go over introductions to specific tools as well. I haven't had any particular requests recently for topics to do for this webinar. So I am looping back to where we started back in February of going through how-to guides for the CI tools. So we're going to be looking at the Doors and Windows tool again. So hopefully some of you who are watching didn't see that the first time around, so we're going to be covering that again. Today's session I will cover the beginning part of the tool, so why you might want to use it, and then we'll look into how you can actually get up and running, drawing up some windows and some doors. So we'll look at those aspects, and then in future versions of the webinar we will possibly look at scheduling and schedule notes and some other things like that, if that's what people want to see. But yeah, before I start, if you do have any questions as we are going through the session, just enter those in the chat panel, or the chat panel as we go, and I'll check on those about halfway through to see if there's anything that I can answer while we're live. And if you have any other questions that you can think of later, just send those through to our support desk by emailing nz.support@centralinnovation.com. Also, if you have any ideas for future versions of this webinar of what I should cover, please send those through to support as well. So just email nz.support and just say, hey, for a future version of the CI Tools webinar, could you teach us how to do whatever it is you want to know how to do? Because I'm running out of ideas for things to show. So if you do have anything in particular you'd like to see, let me know. With Doors and Windows today, I'm going to be using the tool in ArchiCAD 27, but pretty much all of what we're going to look at today is also available in 26 and earlier as well. We're not going to be looking at anything today that is sort of a newer feature, because we're just going to be looking at sort of the core functionality of the tool. So if you're using an old version, you don't need to worry. This will still cover off most of how it works. All right, with that out of the way, let's get into the Doors and Windows tool. So why might you want to use the Doors and Windows tool is probably the main question that you will have at the very beginning here. So the Doors and Windows tool is aimed at being essentially a single element that you can place, that you can produce any kind of window using. So one of the things that it aims to do is reduce you, or rather remove you having to decide at an early stage what kind of window you want to do. So rather than jumping into the basic Windows folder and finding exactly the type of window setup you like, you can choose just our single window element and design anything that you want to using that. So it removes that need to have that decision there, and it also means that you can place this window into your project very early on in the design process. So it could go in at a very, very early stage as a sort of a placeholder saying this is a window, and then you place in one of our windows, and all it really is there for is to show there will be a window there, but it doesn't have the detail yet. And as you go further through the process using the same place element, you can just keep going back in and adding further detail to it to make it closer to what you eventually want it to be. So it's intended to be used at all phases of the process without you having to switch between objects or anything like that. The other main function of the Doors and Windows tool is that it just has a very, very large amount of customization available in it that will allow you to model your windows and doors to a quite high degree of detail and specificity. So if that's something that you need, the Doors and Windows tool can help you with that. So I'm looking at the window tool here, and we'll probably spend most of today's session just looking through the window tool. The way that the door tool works is quite similar to the window tool as well, but the window tool can be a bit more complex in some cases, so that's why we'll start with that one so you can see everything. And then we've got our settings over here. So for now, I'm going to ignore the configuration page here because that is for using preset window styles, which we're not going to look at today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to jump to glazing panel layout, which is the best place to start with for once you get beyond just placing a window in the size that you want. So obviously we already have a window in the size that we want. We can place that into our wall. And then let's go and view that just so that we can see what we're looking at. Show the marquee. All right, so there's our window there. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go back into the settings and start adding some additional detail. And the glazing panel layout is the place where you can change the layout of the glazing panel. That's why it's called that. And what you'll notice when you come in here is that it has this sort of interactive, almost sort of wireframe view of the set out of the window. At the moment we only have one panel, so it doesn't look like much. But this here is how we are going to build up the shape or the layout of what our panels in our window are going to be. So to start with, we have a single panel selected at the moment. This grey colour indicates that we've got it selected. And you can see down at the bottom, we've got an insert option here, and then we've got a plus and minus button. And you can see as I'm hovering over these, that the plus button is going to create a copy of the selected panel, and the minus button will delete the selected panel. So what we can do at the very beginning is, if we want to split this one in half, we just hit the plus button to create a copy of the currently selected panel. So now we have two panels. And you'll see that we get a little diagram of what type of panel we have in each. So what we can do is, let's deselect one of them, so we only have this panel selected. Now we can come over to the right here, and we can change the settings of what we're looking at. So we can come in here and we can say, this one here should be an awning window. You'll see the notation for that. The dashed lines will display in the model view now, and you can see that the representation shows an awning window instead of the fixed panel. And if I deselect that and come over to this one, we can do the same here. So we could change this one to a, let's just go with a left hung window. So you can see that applies there. And again, our icon down here changes. So now we have created a bit more of a detailed window. So you can see that it's displaying the line work that we want it to, and the inner frames and that sort of thing. Let's go back into the settings. There's also a couple more controls in here over how this layout will work, particularly this one here. So below the type of panel that we have selected, we can also control the width of the panel. This will default to fit into the available width, so we'll always get even sizes for the panels that are in here, but we can come in here and say, actually, I want to override this, and we have the awning one selected. Let's say that the awning one will be narrower than the main one, so we're 1200 wide, so let's make this one 300 wide. Okay, so you can see now that we have a fixed width set for this value, it sets it to the number that we have it controlling. But if I select the other one, you can see it's still set to fit to available width, so it's just taking up whatever space is left after the one that we've set there. So you could go through and enter the values that you want for each side, or just enter the values for the ones that you know the size for, and let the rest just take up the space that's available there. And we can also choose the opening direction for any opening windows that we have there. Down at the bottom, you can see we also have the option to add a custom sash. We're not going to look at that today, but if you do want to do that, the option is there. And we've got this option here to form a grid. So at the moment, we just have a single element, so it's a 1x1 grid. But we can go in here and we can say 2x2, and it will just repeat the unit that we have placed the amount of times that we tell it to place it. So this is a good way of producing say, a very large section of repeating panels or something like that, you can quite easily do that using the former grid control here without having to actually go through and add all of those individual panels. If they all happen to be the same, using the grid option is a good way to get that done. But they'll still conform to the settings for the width, and they'll still be the type that you select here. I'll leave that at 1x2 for now. Yeah. So you can use the glazing panel addition and minus options here to build up the shape of the window that you want. But as I noted before, we also have this insert option here. So what I can do is I can click on insert, and I can say insert a panel above, which doesn't do anything because I didn't have anything selected. Let's select this one and say insert a panel above now, and now you'll see that it adds a panel above the set that we have here. This again is adding a duplicate of the one we had selected, so you can see this one also is a left-hung casement and it is forming a 1x2 grid. Let's just set that back to 1x1, and let's make this one some louvers. So we have a panel running along the top of the piece that we had selected. We can also add a panel that runs the full length of the window by choosing, rather than adding a panel below, we can add a bottom row or a top row, you can see as well. And this will make one that essentially ignores the divisions that we have in here and just goes all the way across the full length. So a panel below will add an additional panel below the one that you have selected, whereas a row below or above will go across the full length of the bottom or top of the window. So we can build that up that way. And this one we should set to be something else. Let's make that a slider. And when you choose a window that has multiple leaves available in it, you can also set the numbers just below in here. So we can set that to have two leaves for the slider. So as you can see, that's allowing us to build up a pretty complicated little window there, laying it out the way that we want. So this is probably the sort of the next step of making the window what you want it to be, is getting it laid out in roughly the way that you want your window to be laid out, whether it's just a single opening or something very complicated like this. I should also note as well, something that you might have hit using some other objects is that there quite often is a limit to the amount of panels you can add. So you can only add like 5 next to each other or something, and then it stops allowing you to add more. There isn't any limit to the amount that you can add using this tool. You can just keep on hitting the plus and it'll just keep adding in windows rather adding in panels for as long as you want it to. So you can just go like this and it'll keep on adding them. Obviously at the moment we've got these set to fixed width, so it's making something kind of nonsensical, but if we go to fit to available width, that will squish them all in there. I'm going to delete those because it looks ridiculous, and let's go back in and just create something sensible looking. Let's just delete that. Okay, so we're roughly back at where we were before. Now that we've got our window set out, done the way that we want it to be, we can then jump into the additional options. I'm just going to quickly check on the comments, see if there's any questions, and then I'll be right back. All right, no questions at this stage, so we will keep going here. So yeah, going into additional settings that you might want to do with this window after the initial sort of setup of the size and that sort of thing. My menu has disappeared. Why has it done that? Apologies. This sometimes happens when I'm streaming for some reason. There we So let's jump up to the top and we'll just go through the rest of the options here. Obviously, I'm not trying to show you these so that you can memorize where everything is. It will be more showing you what is available to actually do so that you can go back and find them later should you need to have them. So the key dimensions does pretty much what it sounds like it would do. It's just the key dimensions settings of our window, so you can see the overall width and height here, which are just reflected from here. We've got a C value for if you want the door to drop down further below the base, and you can choose spacing between leaves and also set a default panel width here as well, which you may have noticed before when I was setting the width of this panel. One of the options was use the default width. That will just always use the preset that you set over here. So that can be handy if it's something that you want to be able to drop in quite easily rather than typing in a width for things each time. Over here on layout, you can control some of the additional stuff that you might have seen going on here. So in particular, we've got the height for the top panel, which is currently 0 because we don't have a top panel. The upper panel height, so when we add an upper panel, what height that should be. So you can see that is here, this louver section. Lower panel height is the same, but on the bottom, which I don't have any lower panels at the moment, so you can't see those. And then bottom panel height is the bottom row, which you can see here, so that's 300 high, so that's that value there. If I came in here and added a value to this one, that will effectively do the same thing as pressing the insert a top row. It will just turn on the top row effectively. So you can set that back to 0 if you ever want to get rid of the top and bottom rows. And then down at the bottom here, we have a couple of controls over how it is measured, and also if you want any repeats as well. So it's a single unit at the moment, but you can have a repeating value here. So we can say, actually, I want 3 of the entire setup, and you can see in the same space that we had before, it's just copied the exact structure that we set up back in the glazing layout 3 times. So this can again be useful if you're wanting to create a very large window which just repeats the same pattern over and over. This is another good way of doing that, where it will just do exactly the thing that you have in the layout, the amount of times that you tell it to. Next is the shape settings. This will allow you to control the shape of the exterior of the window. So you can choose a different wall or head shape, head or sill shape rather. So these are both flat by default, and they probably will be in most cases. But we do also have plenty of options for other shapes should you need those. So we've got falling to right, which does what it sounds like it will do. You can define the values for a sort of an offset for the fall angle. You can define the actual fall angle itself, or you can define the distance that the fall is, in which case it'll automatically calculate the angle. So you can go either way. So if we say that A and B are both 0 and our fall amount is 200, you will see that happen on our preview here, and you can see that it automatically calculates the fall angle at 9.4 degrees. If we were to come in here and say, actually, I want it to be 11 degrees, you will see that C is automatically calculated to say the drop is actually 233 now. So you can enter either of those values there. Falling to the right works exactly the same way, but going in the opposite direction, obviously. So if we go 200 here, you'll see that falling in that direction. And if we use one of these offsets, you can see that as well. So let's do a 100 in from each side. So you can see we now have flat sections for 100 mils first, and then the fall happens. So you can do that too. Arch will do pretty much what it sounds like it will do. So again, we have the same offsets for those ends, and then the C and D values determine the height of the arch on each side. So the C is an arch of 375 and the D is the same. However, if we made this one different, you will see that the arc on each side will be different now. Cut corners, again, pretty self-explanatory. It just lets you define the size of the cuts and from the edges. Gable, we'll do gable cuts meeting in the center. You can choose where the center is by entering the E value here. You can see it's exactly in the center at the moment, so it's 600, but you could have that skewed if you needed to. So that will just push the, whoops, I meant to do 800. It'll just push that over away from the center. So if you have uneven panels and you still want it to be centered, you can just make that match up. And then the A, B, C, and D values define the offsets and the height of the fall. Gothic arch does exactly what it sounds like. Again, it will let you define offsets, the size of the arch, and the center of the arch. The elliptic arch works the same way, but it's elliptical, and parabolic works in the same way as well, but it is following a parabola. And then rounded corners will do exactly what it sounds like as well. These are all pretty self-explanatory, but just to go through them so you can see what they look like. Steps will create a stepped pattern, so each individual split panel will be separated by a stepping here. So you can see at the moment I've got 2 of them. If I come into the glazing layout here and add some additional panels, you'll see it adds additional steps there. So it's just following those along, and the amount that they drop is defined in this little table here. So you can see the first one is 0, so that's full height. Second one's dropping 300, then 600, then 900, and so on. And then the last one is polygon, and it's kind of similar to step, but it also allows them to be angular. So you can set the size of each size sort of drop from the previous part. So you select the panel you want to modify and then enter the value that you want to modify there. So we can say A is actually 0, and that will drop down like that. And then we could say that panel 3, let's say B is 300, and that will kind of jump back up towards the end. And so you can make some pretty odd shapes using that, or if you want to sort of shape it to match maybe something that's above it or something like that, you can use this to chop it into the facets that you need for doing something like that. And then the sill shapes are roughly the same as the head shapes, so we won't go through all of these, but they work in pretty much the same way. So you can apply arches, the stepping for the bottom, polygonal shape if you want to do those, and the different arches and gables and cut corners and all of those things. You can set those there. And then next to those, we also have the join adjacent settings. So this will control how the joints work. So everything is set to frame at the moment. But if, for instance, we go through and set the left and right jambs to be glass joints, you will see that we get no frames on the edges there. So it's a little bit hard to see in this view, but can we see it better in floor plan? Yeah, you can see it better in floor plan. So you can see the mitering is happening because that's what we told it to do. But because we're not actually meeting up with another corner window or anything, this doesn't really make much sense. But essentially, it will allow you to create glass butt joints with other panels. And you can define the miter angle there as well. So if you're not coming in at a right angle, you can set whatever you need that to be. Corner post works kind of similarly, but it just puts a post in instead of the frame. And frame obviously is the default. And then for the head and sill, we can do the same. So if you're wanting to do the same thing, but vertically rather than horizontally, you have the same options there. So you could have a glass joint at the top, which just means there'll be no frame across the top there. Glazing panel layout we've already seen. Snap sizes is part of the configuration, so we'll look at that in a different session. But the last thing we'll look at today is the frame settings. So this obviously allows you to control the settings for the frame. So we have a little diagram of what each of these values are, because describing each one in text would just take up a very large amount of space. And once we get to people using different terminology in different places, it gets a bit tricky. So using the diagram is much easier. So you can go through and find the thing that you want to change and modify that. So you can see all of those values here. These are the settings for the main frame options, and then we've got some inset settings and that sort of thing. We also have an option to include a flange down the bottom here. If you turn that on, you'll get additional values for the flange, and you can also control the option to have mullion sizes be different than the overall frame size. So if you want to essentially override those from matching the actual frame size, you can tick this option here, and you can see when I do it that the E value is toggling between 45 when they are not set to differ to 10, which is whatever you set it to basically. Then over on the right we can control the doorstop thickness and the setback from the frame, the size of corner posts if you have those set, and then we have shortcuts to a couple of other settings here. So if I open up frame, you can see we've also got sill profile options, so we can attach a sill by just coming in here and clicking the sill profile we want. You can choose if it should run under door leaves if you have those in your window, and also if the frame should run under it. And then the inner frame settings allow us to control the frame settings for the inner frames. So rather than the overall frame size, this is the frame of the inner frames. And you can also choose to deal with the head and sill widths differently, so that these are grayed out by default because they will match. But if you turn this option on, those will unlink, and you can override those by entering values there. But again, it follows the same sort of structure as the main frame tab. Now with all of those changes done, we can go back and see how it looks in 3D. I'm sure it looks lovely. So you can see we've got our glass butt joint up at the top here, and everything else that we did. So yeah, so that's the basics of using the window tool, and giving you an idea of some of the settings that we can control. Next week we'll go through some of the further options here to do with trims, and that sort of thing, and we'll also look at the different options for the display of the window, and then we'll also look at doors as well. And then in the week after that we will look at creating some schedules. The Door and Window tool contains its own scheduler separate to the Archicad scheduler, which may do things the way that you would like them to, in which case you can use them for that, and I'll show you how to work that scheduler and how you can get notes on it and that sort of thing. I'll quickly check for any final questions before we finish up. Okay, looks like no further questions today. So that will be it for me. Thanks for your time, everyone. Remember, if you do have any suggestions for things you'd like to see in this webinar, please send those through to nz.support@centralinnovation.com. That would be much appreciated. It will save me from having to think up something to show. And if you had any questions about this session that you think of later, I can either cover them next time, or the support person can just help you with those when you send them through. Thanks for your time today, though, and I'll catch you at the next one.